I didn't write too funky to be liked, and I definitely didn't write it to look good. By that point, I already knew what looking good meant to an audience. I'd lived inside that expectation for a long time, the smile on cue, the eyes finding the camera, the correct angle of the face. The kind of confidence people assume you have just because they see you often enough, even when you don't actually feel it yourself. I learned early how easily people fall in love with an image and how little interest they have in what's happening underneath, as long as the surface keeps doing its job. Faith taught me something I didn't fully understand at the time. When you meet expectations too perfectly, people stop really seeing you. They start using you. Not out of cruelty, not out of intent, but out of routine. Nobody thinks I'm using this person. They think this is what he does, and they clap the loudest at the exact moment you disappear completely inside the role they're comfortable with. When the rhythm of Too Funky appeared, I knew right away this wasn't a song for the stage. It wasn't a song for posing or presentation. It was a song for a body that was exhausted from being treated like an object. That rhythm didn't come from trends, it didn't come from clubs, it came from breathing. My breathing back then. Uneven, interrupted, full of pauses. Like I was constantly waiting for someone to ask me once again to become someone I no longer wanted to be. The bass doesn't push forward, it doesn't drive you anywhere, it holds you in place. It feels like a hand on your chest, not gentle but honest. It's about tension stretched just short of release, about control that's close to cracking, but still holding together for now. And I understood something else just as clearly. If I appeared in that video, everything would collapse. People would start watching me again. They wouldn't listen to what the body was saying. They'd search for the familiar signals, the shortcuts they already knew how to read, so I stayed out of frame. Still, I knew the video would be about the gaze either way, about desire, about who looks first and who belongs to whom in that moment. That's why I chose people who understood the price of being seen. People whose appearance had always been a surface, and beneath that surface, control. I didn't choose them because they were the most beautiful. There are beautiful people everywhere. I chose the ones who knew how to look like they weren't for sale. Linda Evangelista entered a room quietly, but the air shifted. It's hard to explain unless you've witnessed it. She moved as if the space already belonged to her. No rush, no apology. When she was in the makeup chair, she barely spoke. Not out of arrogance, out of economy. She conserved herself, and I recognized that instinct. I was learning how to do the same thing at the time, only much less successfully. She could lift her eyes to the mirror, meet her own gaze for a second, then lower them again. No smile. No, does this work? Just a check-in. I'm here. I'm in control. And strangely, that was calming. Because next to her, I didn't feel the need to perform. She didn't pull attention from me. She was self-contained, like a closed door. Naomi Campbell was something else entirely, not a model, a force. She moved like a wave coming straight toward you, like there was an engine inside her that never shut off. On set, people respected her not because she was famous, but because she could stop a room with a pause. Her gaze felt like a spotlight. Not cruel, just exact. When she looked at you, it felt like she already knew where you were vulnerable. Standing near her, I felt it in my stomach. That old, almost childish sensation of being afraid someone might read you too clearly. We didn't talk about personal things. A few short exchanges. Small jokes. Something about the lights. About the smell of hairspray. About how cold the studio was again. But between those words was an unspoken understanding. We both knew the cost of what had been projected onto us. Cindy Crawford was human. She carried a rare balance. She could seem untouchable one moment, then say something simple and grounded, and suddenly everyone relaxed. It was a very American kind of confidence, calm, without aggression. She didn't dominate a space. She held it, softly but firmly, and that was dangerous for me in a different way. Around people like that, it's easy to want warmth. And at that point in my life, I was almost as afraid of warmth as I was of loneliness. Tatiana Patitz was cold poetry. Her face carried emotion the way weather carries pressure, quietly, but you feel the shift. She could stand completely still, and it spoke louder than movement ever could. There was more meaning in her silence than in most conversations I had at music meetings where everyone always wanted something from me. With her, I didn't want to joke. I wanted not to interfere. That group, Linda, Naomi, Cindy, Tatjana, wasn't a lineup of stars. It was a coordinate system. 4 different forms of control, 4 different ways of belonging to no one but yourself. But something was still missing. Someone who broke the rule. RuPaul on set felt like an exhale. A person who didn't ask permission to exist. He didn't try to be normal, didn't try to blend in, didn't soften himself to make others comfortable. And there was something deeply therapeutic in that, because my entire life, I had been softening edges, choosing words carefully, adjusting posture, managing expressions, all to avoid provoking the wrong reaction. Next to him, I noticed myself breathing deeper, literally. My shoulders dropped, my jaw unclenched. We didn't exchange anything profound, no speeches, no confessions. But his presence alone was a quiet reminder. You can be yourself and not fall apart. Later, people asked me if I had relationships with them, and that question always irritated me, because it assumes intimacy has to be physical. What I felt back then was something else entirely. My closeness existed in distance. I didn't want anyone involved in that project to accidentally take something from me. I didn't want my internal tension to become someone else's burden. I didn't want to wake up the next day realizing I'd taken a step just to feel relief, only to understand that everything would now be worse. And I didn't want any of those women to become a reason for me to hide inside another story. Instead of finally living as myself, we worked like people who understood the rules of the game and didn't confuse it with life. There was a lot of beauty on set, but very little flirting. Beauty functioned as a tool there, sharp, cold, and because of that, honest. I deliberately allowed the Mugler world to become too sharp, too glossy, almost aggressive, because gloss is also a form of pressure when you're empty inside. I wanted the viewer to feel that showroom, that runway where desire turns into a mechanism. Too Funky looks like a video about sex. Inside, it's about power, about how power lives in posture, in who looks first, in who doesn't explain, in who knows how to be desired without giving themselves away completely. Too Funky is a song about a boundary, about the moment when you're still holding yourself together, but you already know that beyond this point, it's either honesty or repeating old mistakes. I was afraid of repeating them, afraid of hiding again behind an image, a joke, a confidence that wasn't mine, afraid of handing the audience something that should have stayed with me. People often think this song was a provocation. It wasn't. It was a confession. I didn't want to be overly sexual. I didn't want to be too available. I wanted to be exactly as available as I felt alive. If you listen closely, Too Funky doesn't seduce. It waits. It doesn't say, look at me. It says, feel yourself. And maybe that's why it still works. Because it isn't a track about the body. It's a track about what happens before the body allows itself to be seen. I removed myself from the frame because, for the first time in my life, I wanted to protect not the image, but the person. I realized that sometimes the most honest gesture is a step back and silence instead of explanation. If there's anything new in this story, it's here, in the fact that I finally stopped trying to win the audience over. Stopped trying to educate it. Stopped arguing with how it functions. I accepted something simple. People look because they're afraid to look inside themselves. I used to look the same way, just earlier. And then I made a song that asks the listener to feel their own pulse, and to ask themselves the question I was afraid to ask for years. Who controls your body? You or someone else's gaze?